The air up here, it doesn't just sit, it clings. It's thick with the scent of wet copper and rot, like the mountains are trying to digest you while you're still breathing. I shouldn't have come back to Blackwood Holler. My granddaddy used to say that some land is just wrong. He called it hungry soil. And standing here, in front of his collapsing cabin, with the sun dipping below the ridge like a bleeding eye, I finally understand what he meant. The silence isn't peaceful. It's a physical weight. There are no crickets, no owls, just the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Thump, 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 thump. Like a drum calling something in from the tree line. I stepped onto the porch, the wood screaming under my boots. I only needed the deed, just the papers in the iron lockbox. Then I'd be gone before the mist really started to crawl up from the creek. I pushed the door open and the smell hit me. It wasn't just dust. It was warm, like a living thing had been nesting in the dark. I clicked my flashlight on, the beam cutting through the gloom, dancing over peeling wallpaper and broken glass. That's when I saw them. The scratches. Deep, jagged gouges in the floorboards. All leading toward the center of the room, toward the heavy oak dining table. I walked over, my breath hitching in my throat. The scratches weren't from an animal trying to get out. They were from something, fingernails maybe, trying to hold on, to pull back. I reached for the edge of the table, my hand trembling, and I leaned down to look underneath. The floorboards there were loose, shifted aside to reveal a dark, gaping hole in the earth beneath the house. And from that hole came a sound. Not a growl, not a hiss. It was a voice. My voice. High-pitched, perfect, and shaking with terror, whispering from the pitch-black dirt, "Please, don't look down here, Elias. I'm already inside." My flashlight flickered, then died. In the sudden, suffocating blackness, I felt a hand. A cold, damp, skinless hand, wrapped firmly around my ankle. Part 2, The Harvest of Blackwood Holler. I kicked with a strength I didn't know I had, feeling the slick, cold grip on my ankle tighten until I heard the distinct, sickening pop of my own joint. The scream that tore out of my throat was echoed perfectly by the thing in the dirt, a twin chorus of agony that vibrated through the floorboards. I scrambled back, my flashlight rolling across the wood, its beam stroking over something white and wet emerging from the hole. It wasn't a hand, not really. It was a cluster of pale, pulsing root fibers, woven together into the unmistakable shape of fingers, tipped with jagged shards of bone. I didn't stop to think. I didn't grab the deed. I lunged for the door, my leg trailing behind me like a broken toy, the wet slapping sound of something dragging itself out of the earth, following right at my heels. I burst through the front door and into the mountain air, but the mist had turned into a wall, thick, gray, and smelling of ancient, stagnant water. I fumbled for my keys, my fingers slick with the dark, sap-like fluid I didn't realize was leaking from my own skin. I reached my truck, the engine screaming to life as I floored it, the tires churning the gravel of the old logging road. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just watched the road in the rearview mirror, watching the silhouette of the cabin shrink into the fog. But something was wrong. The road, it wasn't leading out. The trees, they were leaning in, their branches interlacing like ribs above the truck, blocking out the stars until I was driving through a tunnel of living, groaning wood. The truck suddenly sputtered, the engine dying with a final wet wheeze. I sat there in the silence, the heater clicking as it cooled, the only sound the rhythmic thud-thud of the blood in my temples. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, but my hand brushed against the deed, the papers I thought I'd left behind. I pulled them out, the beam of the dome light flickering over the parchment. It wasn't a deed. It was a drawing, an old hand-inked diagram of a human body, splayed open, with roots growing through the veins. And at the bottom, in my granddaddy's handwriting, it said, "The land doesn't take what it's already grown." I looked into the rearview mirror, my breath hitching, because I didn't see my face. I saw the cabin. I saw the dining table. I saw the dark, gaping hole in the floor. And then, I saw myself, the version of me from 10 minutes ago, leaning down, reaching for the edge of the table, looking directly into my eyes from the other side of the glass. I wasn't the man escaping in the truck. I was the thing in the dirt, and I had finally caught him. The mountains don't keep secrets. They just bury them under layers of rotted leaves and limestone. I've lived in these hills my whole life, 40 years of tracking elk and dodging copperheads, but I never believed the stories about the shifters. My papa used to say that if you're out past sundown and you hear a friend calling your name from the deep brush, you don't answer. You don't even breathe. You just keep your eyes on the trail and pray the shadows don't start folding in on themselves. I thought it was just old-timer superstition, a way to keep kids from wandering into the sinkholes. But 3 nights ago, out near the Devil's Elbow, the air changed. It didn't just get cold. It got empty, like the woods had been hollowed out from the inside. I was tracking a buck, a massive 12-pointer that had been raiding my garden, when the sun dipped behind the ridge. 1 second, the sky was a bruised purple. The next, it was as black as a coal seam. I clicked on my headlamp, the beam cutting through the fog that was rolling off the creek like steam. That's when I heard it. "Hey, Silas? You there, buddy?" It was Miller's voice. My neighbor, Miller. Clear as a bell, coming from a thicket of mountain laurel about 30 yards to my left. I stopped dead. Miller had been dead for 6 months. Heart attack in his sleep. My skin didn't just crawl, it tried to leave my body. I didn't answer. I gripped my rifle until my knuckles turned white, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Silas, I'm hurt. Help me up, will you?" The voice was perfect. It had that same gravelly rasp Miller got from 40 years of Marlboros. But as I swept my light toward the thicket, the beam hit something, and my breath hitched. It wasn't a man. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and leaned over like a broken hinge. It was draped in a mangy elk hide, but the legs were wrong. They were too long, the knees bending backward with a wet, grinding sound as it shifted its weight. It didn't have a face, just a mask of pale, stretched skin where eyes should be, and a mouth that stayed wide open, even while Miller's voice poured out of it. I fired. The crack of the .30-06 echoed off the rock faces, a deafening roar in the stillness. I saw the thing jerk, the bullet tearing through the elk hide, but there was no blood. Just a puff of gray dust, like I'd shot a bag of old flour. It didn't scream. It didn't even flinch. It just tilted its head. And then the voice changed. It wasn't Miller anymore. It was me. It was my own voice, dripping with a mocking, jagged edge. "Nice shot, Silas, but you missed the heart." It began to run, not like an animal, not like a man, but on all fours, its limbs clicking and snapping like a centipede as it circled me in the dark. I turned, trying to keep it in my light, but it was too fast. It was a blur of fur and bone, weaving through the trees, getting closer with every revolution. I scrambled backward, tripping over a root, my rifle flying out of my hands into the laurel. I was on the ground, staring into the pitch-black woods, hearing the wet thump, thump, thump of it, charging toward me. And then the sound stopped, right behind me. I felt the heat of a heavy breath on the back of my neck, smelling of old copper and wet fur, and a hand with fingers far too long rested gently on my shoulder. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air in my lungs had turned to lead, heavy and cold, as if the thing behind me was breathing the life right out of my chest. That hand, those fingers, they didn't feel like flesh. They felt like dry, ancient parchment stretched over rusted iron. I felt a tug on my shoulder. Not a pull, but a sampling. Like it was testing the weight of my soul. I threw myself forward, rolling into the dirt, my hands clawing at the loose shale as I scrambled toward the logging trail. I didn't look back. I knew if I saw it, really saw it, my mind would just snap. Like a dry twig under a winter boot, I ran until my lungs burned with the taste of copper, until the shadows of the trees seemed to reach out and trip me. But the clicking followed. Click, snap, thud. It was the sound of bones being rearranged in real time. I reached my cabin just as the moon was swallowed by a bank of heavy, sulphurous clouds. I burst through the door, slamming the bolt home and leaning my back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. I sat there in the pitch black, listening to the wind howl through the eaves. But it wasn't just the wind. It was a melody, a low, humming sound, my mother's favorite lullaby, the one she used to sing to me in the rocking chair by the hearth. "Silas, honey, open the door. It's cold out here." It was her voice. Perfect. Every inflection, every soft, southern drawl. But my mother has been in the ground for 12 years. I covered my ears, sobbing into my knees, until the voice stopped. Then came the scratching. Not on the door, but on the walls. High up, near the roofline. Something was circling the cabin, its long, spindly limbs tapping against the cedar planks, looking for a way in. I crawled to the kitchen, fumbling for the matches I kept on the counter. I needed light. I needed to see that I was still real. I struck a match, the sulfur flare blinding me for a second. And that's when I noticed the silence. The scratching had stopped. The humming was gone. The only sound was the rhythmic tick, tick, tick of the clock on the mantel. I stood up, my legs shaking so hard I had to lean on the table. I looked toward the window, expecting to see a face, but all I saw was my own reflection in the dark glass. I looked tired, pale, but it was me. I took a deep breath, the match burning down toward my fingers. I whispered to the empty room, "I'm still here. I'm still Silas." But the reflection didn't whisper back. It didn't even move its lips. My reflection just smiled. A wide, jagged grin that stretched far past the corners of its mouth, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth that looked like splintered bone. I dropped the match, the darkness rushing back in. But in that final spark, I saw my own hand. They weren't hands anymore. They were long, pale fibers of root and gray dust. And as the light died, I heard a voice, my own voice, but coming from the other side of the glass, cold and hungry. "You're doing great, Silas. Keep practicing. By morning, nobody will even know I'm gone, and you'll finally know what it feels like to wear a man." I reached for my face, but my fingers felt like wood. And as I felt the elk hide beginning to sprout from my spine, I realized the thing in the woods hadn't been chasing me to kill me. It was waiting for me to get home, so it could finally leave the cabin. The elders in the mountains don't use the name Bigfoot. To them, that's a tourist word, something for gift shops and cheap documentaries. Up here in the deep crags of the Smokies, they call it the Booger Man, or the Wood Devil. My pawpaw used to say the forest isn't just trees and dirt. It's a living, breathing skin. And sometimes, that skin gets a mind of its own. I'm a surveyor, been mapping these ridges for 15 years, but I've never seen the woods go dead silent in the middle of a July afternoon. No cicadas, no squirrels, just a heavy, pressurized stillness that makes your ears pop like you're diving deep underwater. I was working a line near Cade's Cove, pushing through a stand of ancient hemlocks that looked like they hadn't seen a human soul since the Revolution. The smell hit me first, a thick, oily musk that smelled like a wet dog, rolled in a pile of rotting skunk cabbage. It didn't just drift by. It anchored itself in the back of my throat. I stopped to check my GPS, but the screen was just a mess of static. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I'd ever tracked. A deep, low-frequency thrum, a vibration so heavy I could feel it in my molars. It wasn't a growl, it was a warning. I looked up, my eyes scanning the canopy, and that's when I saw the arch. 2 young pine trees, maybe 20 feet tall, had been bent over and snapped together at the tops, woven into a perfect, twisted gate across the trail. It would have taken a winch and a crew of 4 to do that. My heart started a slow, heavy gallop against my ribs. I turned to head back down the ridge, but a rock the size of a bowling ball slammed into a tree trunk just 3 feet from my head. The impact didn't just crack the wood, it shattered the bark like glass. I didn't run. You don't run from something that can throw like that. You just freeze. I swept my gaze toward the tree line, and through the dense laurel, I saw a shape. It wasn't just big. It was impossible. 8 feet of matted, reddish-black fur, hunched over like a mountain of muscle. But it wasn't the size that broke me. It was the eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were human. Pale, amber-colored, and filled with a cold, ancient intelligence that looked at me not as a man, but as a trespasser. It stepped out from behind a massive oak, and the ground didn't just thud, it shuddered. It opened its mouth, revealing teeth that looked like blunt stones, and let out a sound that tore through the air, a high-pitched, mechanical-sounding whistle that ended in a human-sounding sob. And then, from the ridge behind me and the hollow to my left, 3 more whistles answered. I wasn't being hunted by an animal. I was being surrounded by a family. This concludes the nightmare of the Wood Devil. The punctuation is heavy on the double commas and ellipses to force 11 Labs into a slow, breathless, and increasingly panicked delivery. Part 2. The Weaver of the Woods. The hand didn't crush my shoulder. It vibrated. A low, rhythmic hum that felt like a swarm of bees was nesting under my skin. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. My neck felt like it was made of glass. I just stared forward into the thickening fog, watching as those two pine trees, the arch I'd seen earlier, seemed to move. They didn't just sway in the wind, they reached. Their branches elongated, twisting like fingers, weaving together with a sound like dry bones grinding in a mortar. I realized then, with a cold, paralyzing dread, they weren't just building gates, they were building a cage. I lunged forward, my boots sliding on the wet needles, and I ran. I didn't care about the briars tearing at my face. I didn't care about the drop-offs. I just ran toward the only light I could see, a pale, sickly yellow glow coming from an old coal mining vent about half a mile down the ridge. The whistles followed me, but they weren't behind me anymore. They were above. I looked up, and for a split second, my headlamp caught a glimpse of something moving through the canopy. It wasn't jumping from branch to branch. It was gliding. Those massive, matted shapes were flowing through the trees like liquid shadow, their long limbs snapping out to pull themselves along with a sickening thud, thud, thud. I dove into the mine vent, the rusted iron grating giving way with a screech that echoed into the bowels of the mountain. I scrambled down into the dark, the smell of sulfur and damp earth swallowing me whole. I huddled there, my breath coming in ragged, jagged gasps. Huff, 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 praying that the narrow opening would keep them out. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the drip, drip, drip of mineral-heavy water. Then, the sound started. A soft, rhythmic scratching on the rock above my head. Scritch, scritch, scritch. And then, the voice. It wasn't a whistle anymore. It was a woman's voice. It was my mother. Silas. Honey, come out of the dark. The tea's getting cold. My blood turned to slush. My mother had been dead for 20 years. But the voice was perfect. The same gentle lilt, the same way she'd say my name when I was a boy. I crawled deeper into the tunnel, covering my ears. But the voices multiplied. Hey, Silas, you forgot your compass. That was Miller, the neighbor who'd gone missing in these same woods 3 summers ago. Help me, Silas. It's so dark down here. That was Sarah, my little sister who disappeared when we were kids. They weren't just mimicking sounds. They were using them. They were a collection of everyone these mountains had ever swallowed. I found a crawl space, a narrow slit in the limestone, and squeezed myself in until I couldn't move my arms. I waited. I don't know for how long. Hours. Maybe days. Eventually, the voices faded. The scratching stopped. The mountain fell back into that heavy, pressurized silence. I finally forced myself to crawl out, my clothes in tatters, my skin covered in a strange, grayish dust. I climbed out of the vent and staggered toward the logging road. By some miracle, my truck was still there. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so hard I dropped them twice. I got inside, locked the doors, and floored it. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station at the edge of the park. I burst through the door, screaming for help, my voice a raspy, broken mess. The ranger behind the desk jumped up, his face pale. Son, what happened to you? I tried to explain. I tried to tell him about the whistles, the arches, the voices. But as I spoke, I noticed something. The ranger wasn't looking at my face. He was looking at my chest. I looked down, and the scream died in my throat. My shirt was torn open, and underneath, my skin wasn't skin anymore. It was thick, coarse, reddish-black fur, erupting from my pores like needles. I reached up to touch my face, but my fingers were too long. The joints were popping and elongating as I watched. I looked at the ranger, and I tried to say, "Help me," but what came out wasn't words. It was a high-pitched, mechanical-sounding whistle. I looked in the reflection of the glass door, and I didn't see a man. I saw a shadow. I saw the wood devil. And as the ranger reached for his radio, I heard a voice behind me, coming from the empty woods outside. It was my own voice, the one I'd had 10 minutes ago, clear and calm, saying, "Don't worry, Ranger. I'm just a surveyor. I'm lost. Can you show me the way back into the trees?" I realized then, they don't kill you. They don't eat you. They just trade. And as my skin finished turning into a matted hide, I felt the sudden, overwhelming urge to go back to the ridge, to find 2 pine trees and start weaving a gate. This story is optimized for 11 labs with specific breath punctuation, extra commas for natural pauses, ellipses for trailing dread, and dashes for sudden, sharp shifts in tone. Part 1. The Silver Cord Hollow. There's a stretch of the Blue Ridge where the map just stops. The locals call it the Silver Cord Hollow, but you won't find that name on any GPS. It's a place where the air tastes like ozone and wet iron, and the shadows don't follow the sun. They follow you. My family has lived on the edge of that hollow for 4 generations, and the rule was always the same. If you see a light in the woods that doesn't flicker, you turn around. If you hear the sound of a baby crying where there shouldn't be a house for miles, you keep walking. But the most important rule, the one my daddy whispered on his deathbed, was about the silver cord. He said if you ever feel a tugging in the center of your chest, like a fish on a line, you cut it. You cut it with whatever you have, or the mountain will reel you in. I was out marking timber 3 days ago, deep in the back 40, where the trees grow so thick the sky is just a memory. It was about 4 in the afternoon, but the light was already fading into a sickly, bruised gray. I was reaching for my marking paint when I felt it, a sharp, electric snap right behind my sternum. It didn't hurt, exactly. It felt like a cold wire had been threaded through my ribs and pulled tight. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest, and that's when I saw it. A thin, shimmering strand, like a spider's web, but glowing with a faint, pulsating violet light. It was coming out of my chest, disappearing into the dense laurel thicket 50 yards ahead. I tried to pull back, but the wire tightened. It wasn't just pulling my body, it was pulling my will. Every time I resisted, my vision would blur, and I'd hear a sound like 1,000 whispers, all speaking at once, right inside my skull. "Come home, Elias! The table is set! Come home!" It was the voice of my grandmother, who'd been lost in these woods during the blizzard of '98. I stumbled forward, my feet moving without my permission, my boots crunching on the dry leaves. The further I went into the hollow, the more the cord thickened. It wasn't a thread anymore. It was a cable of light, vibrating with a low, mournful hum. I broke through the thicket and found myself in a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center sat a cabin, but it wasn't made of wood. It was made of bone, bleached white rib cages of deer and elk woven into walls, with a roof of overlapping crow wings that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. And there, standing on the porch, was my grandmother. She looked exactly as she did the day she vanished. Wearing her blue floral apron, her hair in a neat silver bun, she smiled at me, but her eyes weren't eyes. They were just two glowing violet points of light, identical to the cord in my chest. She held out her hand, and the tug on my ribs became an agonizing rip. "You're just in time, Elias," she whispered, her voice echoing from the trees around me. "The mountain is hungry, and you're the final stitch." She stepped off the porch, and as she moved, I saw her back. She wasn't a person. She was a hollow shell, and thousands of silver cords were erupting from her spine, trailing off into the woods toward every house in the valley. And then, the cord in my chest began to glow, and my feet began to lift off the ground. This is the conclusion of the Silver Cord Hollow. I have significantly expanded the narrative, focusing on sensory horror and a slow, rhythmic build-up to the final twist, punctuated specifically for a chilling 11 Labs performance. Part 2, The Final Stitch. I was hovering, my toes dragging through the dead, gray leaves as the violet light from my chest pulsed in sync with the cabin's wings. The grandmother, or the thing that wore her skin like a thrift store coat, didn't walk toward me. She unfolded. Her limbs moved with the dry, clicking sound of a folding ruler, her spine elongating until she towered over me. I could see the cords now, thousands of them, thin as spider silk, but glowing with that terrible, bruised light. They didn't just go into the woods. They went into the ground, into the air, disappearing into the distance toward the town of Blackwood. Every person I knew, every neighbor, every friend, they were all tethered to this bone shack in the center of a hollow that shouldn't exist. "Don't fight it, Elias," the thing whispered, its mouth hanging open like a broken hinge while the voice vibrated out of its chest. "The mountain is a tapestry, and we are just the thread. You've been wandering the edges for so long. Don't you want to finally be held?" The cord in my chest gave a violent, electric jerk. I felt my heart lurch toward my ribs, a physical, tearing sensation that made me vomit a thick, violet bile onto the white bone porch. The pain was absolute. It wasn't just my body. It felt like my memories were being pulled out through the wire. My first kiss, the smell of my mother's kitchen, the sound of the creek in summer, they were all flowing down that silver cord, feeding the cabin, feeding the mountain. I looked down at my belt, my fingers numb and clumsy. My timber marking knife was there, a heavy hooked blade I used to blaze trails. "Cut it," my daddy's voice echoed in my mind, a memory the mountain hadn't swallowed yet. "Cut it, or it reels you in." I reached for the handle, but the grandmother thing shrieked, a sound like metal grinding on bone. She lunged, her long, needle-like fingers reaching for my eyes. "You are the anchor!" she roared, the voice now 1,000 screaming souls. "You are the one who brings them all home!" I didn't think. I just grabbed the hook and swung. I didn't aim for her. I aimed for the space between us. I aimed for the light. The blade hissed through the air, and as the steel touched the violet cord, the world shattered. It wasn't a sound. It was a silent explosion of white noise that blinded me. The cord didn't just snap. It lashed back. I felt a searing heat across my chest, a spray of something cold and wet hitting my face, and then I was falling through the bone walls, falling through the crow wing roof, falling into a darkness so deep It felt like solid stone. I woke up at the edge of the logging road, the sun just beginning to peek over the ridge. My chest was burning. I looked down, and my shirt was shredded, a long, jagged scar running right over my heart. But the cord was gone. The violet light was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my head spinning, and ran for my truck. I drove like a madman, the tires screaming on the gravel, not stopping until I saw the familiar lights of the diner in town. I needed people. I needed to see faces that weren't made of bone. I burst into the diner, gasping for air, my eyes wild. The waitress, Martha, looked up from the counter, her brow furrowed in concern. "Elias? Lord, boy, you look like you've been through a wood chipper." What happened? I tried to speak, but my throat was dry as dust. I just pointed at my chest, at the scar. She walked over, leaning in close to look, and then she smiled. It was a soft, sad smile. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "you didn't cut the cord. You just sharpened the hook." I froze. I looked at Martha, and then I looked at the other patrons in the diner. They were all looking at me. They weren't eating. They weren't talking. They were just watching. And then I felt it. A soft, rhythmic thump against my back. I turned slowly, looking into the large vanity mirror behind the counter. I didn't see the cord coming out of my chest anymore. I saw it coming out of the back of my head, but it wasn't going toward the mountains. It was branching out. Dozens of tiny, violet threads, stretching out from my own skin and hooking directly into the chests of everyone in the diner. Martha, the cook, the old men in the booths. They were all tethered to me. I looked back at the mirror, and my reflection wasn't mine anymore. It was the cabin. I saw the bone walls, the crow wing roof, and standing in the doorway was me, wearing that same blue floral apron, my eyes glowing with a faint, violet light. I wasn't the victim escaping the hollow. I was the new weaver. And as the people in the diner began to stand up in perfect, silent unison, their movements clicking like folding rulers, I realized the final truth. The mountain doesn't just reel you in. It turns you into the bait. This story is custom built for 11 Labs narration. I've used double commas. For deep lung-filling breaths, ellipses. For moments of fading sanity, and dashes for sharp, jagged transitions. The focus here is on the uncanny valley and liminal horror. The idea that the monster isn't just a beast, but something that is almost human and failing at it. Part 1. The Winter of the Hollow Rib. The mountains don't just have ears in the winter. They have stomachs. Down in the deep creases of the Appalachians, where the sun only hits the ground for 2 hours a day, the cold isn't just a season, it's a predator. My Uncle Silas used to call it the thinning. He'd say that when the snow gets deep enough to bury a man standing, the walls between what's alive and what's hungry get real porous. I never believed him, until I got snowed into his cabin near Kettle Crag. 10 days of whiteout. 10 days of the wind screaming through the chinks in the logs. A sound that started to sound less like air, and more like a woman weeping in a language I couldn't understand. By the 5th day, the food was gone. By the 7th, I was boiling my leather boots just to have something to chew on. That's when the whistling started. Not a bird, not the wind. It was a high, melodic trill that seemed to vibrate inside my actual teeth. I looked out the frost-caked window, and through the swirl of the blizzard, I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the tree line. He was tall, too tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but he was as thin as a hemlock branch. He was wearing a tattered flannel shirt, my Uncle Silas's favorite shirt, the one he was wearing when he wandered off back in November. I felt a surge of hope, a desperate, starving heat in my chest. I threw open the door, the sub-zero air hitting me like a physical blow. "Silas, over here!" I screamed, my voice cracking. The figure didn't move for a long time. It just stood there. Then it started to walk toward me, but it didn't walk like a man. Its knees seemed to bend just a little bit too far back, and its arms hung down past its knees, the fingers dragging in the snow like rakes. It stopped 10 yards away, just outside the circle of my porch light. "Elias, I brought meat," the thing said. The voice was Silas's, but it was wrong. It sounded like his voice was being played through a broken radio, layered with the sound of snapping dry wood. It held up a bundle wrapped in frozen burlap. I was so hungry, so delirious with the lack of salt and protein, that I didn't look at its face. I took the bundle. I closed the door. I sat by the fire and tore into it. The meat was cold, blue-veined, and sweet. I ate until my stomach cramped, until I felt the life returning to my limbs. It was only when I reached the bottom of the bundle that I found it. A small silver band. A wedding ring. My wedding ring. The one my wife, Clara, had been wearing when she went to the woods to look for Silas 3 days ago. I froze. The room went silent, except for the tick-tick-tick of the cooling stove. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching, not on the door, not on the walls. It was coming from underneath the floorboards. And then, the voice of the thing outside, the thing that looked like Silas, whispered through the floorboards, right beneath my chair. "Was it enough, Elias? Or are you still empty?" I looked at the door. The heavy iron bolt was still slid shut. I was locked in, and the scratching was getting faster. This is the conclusion to The Winter of the Hollow Rib. The punctuation is specifically designed for 11 Labs to create a slow, agonizing buildup, using double commas, for deep, weighted breaths and dashes, for sharp, frantic realizations. Part 2. The Inheritance of Hunger. The meat, it didn't stay sweet. As soon as I saw that silver band, the taste turned to wet copper and old hair in my mouth. A thick, oily coating that made my tongue feel too large for my jaw. I tried to spit, but my throat had seized up. A hard knot of muscle that felt like it was trying to swallow my own heart. The scratching under the floorboards didn't stop. It grew rhythmic. Scritch, scritch, thud. Like something was using its own ribs to pull itself through the dirt. And the voice, my Uncle Silas's voice, began to laugh. It wasn't a human laugh. It was the sound of a forest fire, the popping and hissing of dry wood being consumed by heat. "You've tasted the winter, Elias. And now, the winter is going to taste you." I scrambled back from the stove, my heels catching on the rough-hewn rug, and I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth. My hands were shaking so hard, the metal rattled against the stone. I looked at the gaps between the floorboards, those dark, narrow slits where the dust of 50 years had settled, and I saw them. Eyes, but they weren't in a head. They were shifting, sliding along the cracks like droplets of mercury. Pale, milky orbs, that had no pupils, no warmth, only a bottomless, vacuum-like hunger. They weren't looking at me. They were looking through me. I lunged for the door, fumbling for the bolt with fingers that felt increasingly numb, increasingly long, but the door didn't open. The wood had swollen, or maybe the mountain was leaning against it, because it felt like I was trying to push back the entire ridge. I turned back to the room, and that's when I noticed the shadow, the figure outside, the one in the flannel shirt. It wasn't standing at the tree line anymore. It was pressed against the window. Its face was a nightmare of the uncanny valley, a mask of pale, translucent skin stretched over a skull that was too narrow, too jagged. It didn't have a nose, just two vertical slits that pulsed with every breath. And its mouth, God, its mouth was wide, stitched shut with thick black thread that looked like frozen veins. It tapped on the glass with a finger that had 3 too many joints. Tink, tink, tink. Clara didn't suffer, the thing at the window whispered, the voice now coming from inside my own ears. She accepted the thinning. She became the marrow. I screamed, a raw, jagged sound that didn't even sound like me, and I swung the poker at the window. The glass shattered, but the cold that rushed in wasn't air. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blue-tinted fog that smelled of ancient ice and rotted pine. The thing outside didn't move. It just stared at me with those amber, human eyes, and that's when I saw the truth. The flannel shirt wasn't Silas's. It was mine. The wedding ring I'd found in the burlap, it wasn't Clara's. I looked down at my own hand, and the skin was gray, the fingernails black and cracked, the bones of my wrist protruding like jagged stones. The floorboards finally gave way. They didn't break. They dissolved into the fog. I fell, not into the crawl space, but into a void that felt miles deep. I hit the dirt, the taste of that meat returning tenfold, a burning hunger erupting in my stomach that made me want to tear my own ribs out just to have something to gnaw on. I looked up, and in the dim light of the dying fire above, I saw a figure leaning over the hole. It was a man in a heavy coat, shivering, his face pale with terror. He looked down at me, and his eyes wide with a desperate, starving hope. He reached out a hand, his voice trembling. Is someone down there? Silas? Is that you? I tried to tell him to run. I tried to tell him that the mountain had already won. But when I opened my mouth, the only sound that came out was a high, melodic whistle. A beautiful, terrifying trill that echoed through the hollow ribs of the mountain. I looked at my hand, now 10 inches long, tipped with shards of yellowed bone, and I realized why the thing at the window hadn't attacked me. It wasn't the monster. It was the memory. I looked up at the man, the new prey, and I didn't feel pity. I felt the thinning. I felt the hunger. And as I began to climb the walls of the pit with a sickening, clicking speed, I heard my own voice, the voice I used to have, coming from the shadows behind the man. Don't be afraid, friend. I've brought meat. The power went out at 9:17 p.m. Not a flicker, not a sputter. 1 second, the living room was lit by the TV's blue glow. The next, it was just black, thick, swallowing black, like someone had draped a blanket over the whole house and tucked the edges under the doors. Outside, the storm had been building for hours. The kind that doesn't just rain, it presses, wind slamming branches against siding, thunder rolling so deep it makes your teeth buzz, sheets of water hissing off the roof like the house is boiling. I sat very still on the couch, remote in my hand, listening to my own breathing. Then the lightning hit, and the world flashed white through the windows. For half a second, I saw my living room frozen in that harsh, perfect light. The coffee table cluttered with junk mail, my throw blanket half off the armrest, the hallway yawning like a throat. And in that flash, I saw something else. A smear of wet on the hardwood floor near the front door. It vanished when the darkness snapped back. But my stomach didn't get the memo. My heart was already climbing my ribs, banging like it wanted out. I told myself it was nothing. The dog's water bowl. Condensation. My imagination getting brave because the lights had turned off. I stood slowly, like quick movements might make the house angry. The only light now was lightning, arriving in quick, irregular bursts, and the faint green LED of the smoke detector blinking in the hallway. I stepped toward the front door. The air smelled different. Not just the usual, laundry detergent, the candle I'd burned earlier. There was something sharper underneath it. Cold rain. But the front door was closed, locked. I knew it was locked because I was alone and my habits were paranoid even on calm nights. I jiggled the knob anyway. Locked. Solid. Lightning flashed again. There were wet footprints on the floor. Bare feet, not shoes. Long toes. A shallow heel. And they weren't coming from the door like someone had tracked rain in. They were going to it. Like someone had been standing inside my house, wet to the ankles, and then walked out. The storm boomed so loud it rattled a picture frame, and I flinched hard enough to pull a muscle in my neck. I backed up, eyes glued to the floor, trying to count the prints. They ended at the base of the door. I stared at the deadbolt, at the chain latch, at the edge of the door where it met the frame. Nothing moved, no handle turning, no draft, no shifting shadow. Just the storm screaming outside like it was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone from the couch. No service, of course. Of course, because storms don't just kill power, they kill the tiny comforts too. I turn on my flashlight and the cone of light cut through the dark, catching dust motes and making the wet prints shine like oil. I follow them again, slower this time, and my skin prickled when I realized something else. The prints were spaced oddly, too close together, like whoever made them was walking carefully. Measured, quiet, not drunk, not hurried, sneaking. My flashlight trembled. "Hello?" I called, and my voice sounded small, swallowed by the house. "If someone's in here, I'm calling the cops." A lie, a stupid, loud lie. The storm answered for me with a crack of thunder that made the windows vibrate in their frames. I kept the flashlight pointed at the hallway and tried to breathe like I wasn't about to ruin my own life with panic. I stepped toward the kitchen because the kitchen had knives and because I didn't know what else to do. My bare feet made soft slaps on the tile. Every sound I made seemed amplified, like the house was keeping score. I reached the knife block, pulled out the biggest one, and immediately felt ridiculous. Some suburban horror movie extra. Still, my fingers tightened around the handle like it mattered. I turned back toward the living room. Lightning. In the flash, I saw the back door standing slightly open. Not wide, not obviously. Just enough that the thin line of stormlight cut in, a bright blade slicing through the dark. My mouth went dry. I never leave that door open. Never. It's got a stubborn latch that sticks, and I have to pull it hard to shut it all the way. And now, in the quiet between thunder, I could hear it. A faint tapping, not on glass, on wood, slow, patient, like fingernails testing the surface. I aimed my flashlight at the back door. The beam hit the gap, and the sliver of outside became a sharp, trembling line of rain and blackness. The tapping stopped. I didn't move, didn't blink. The storm shoved a gust against the door, and it creaked wider by an inch. Rain scent rolled into my kitchen, cold and metallic. My flashlight beam shook so badly, it made the edges of the door blur. "Who's there?" I whispered, because my voice wouldn't get loud anymore. Nothing. Then a new sound, soft and wet, like someone shifting weight on a soaked rug. The beam lowered, drawn by instinct to the floor. There were more footprints, fresh ones, glossy and black with water, appearing on the tile just inside the doorway. But the door hadn't moved enough for a person to come in. Lightning flashed again, brighter, and for that blink of time, the whole kitchen sharpened. The back door stood open wider now, and in the gap, I saw a hand, not a whole person. Just fingers curling around the edge of the doorframe, pale and slick, knuckles white with pressure. The fingers were too long, the nails too clean, like they belonged to someone who didn't work with their hands. The hand was inside the line of my flashlight. I made a sound I didn't recognize, half gasp, half choking laugh, and stumbled backward, knife held out like it was a shield. The fingers withdrew instantly, vanishing into the storm dark. The door swung shut with a soft click, not slammed by wind, pulled closed, and then latched from the outside. My brain tried to reject what my eyes had just reported. It tried to file it under wind and panic and shadows. But my body believed it. My body was already sweating cold. I ran to the door and yanked at the handle. It didn't budge. The stubborn latch, my stubborn latch, was engaged. I was locked in. A thud came from the living room. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound of something being set down gently. I turned my flashlight that way, knife shaking in my other hand, and took one step, then another, moving like a person underwater. The living room was a cavern. The only light was my beam and the occasional lightning flash that threw bars of white across the floor. On the coffee table, right where my junk mail had been, there was now a candle. One I hadn't put there. It was the same candle I'd burned earlier, vanilla and cedar, but the lid was off, and a match lay beside it like a tiny bone. The candle wick was blackened, still warm. Someone had lit it recently. A low creak came from the hallway. I snapped my flashlight toward it. Nothing there, but the smoke detector's little green LED blinked. Once, twice. The third blink didn't happen. Instead, it stayed off for a long second, then flickered back on. Like something had passed in front of it. Like a shadow had crossed between the detector and its own tiny light. My throat tightened so hard it felt like I'd swallowed a fist. I backed toward the front door, because the front door was my only exit, and because my brain was screaming, "Leave, leave, leave," even though my body was still trying to understand how I was trapped in my own house. I reached the door. I fumbled for the deadbolt. It wasn't where it should be. The deadbolt was turned halfway. The chain latch hung loose, swaying slightly, like it had been touched. I knew then, with the kind of certainty that makes you cold inside, that someone had been standing behind me at some point, close enough to undo the chain, close enough that if I'd turned around at the wrong moment, a whisper came from upstairs. Not a word I could understand, just a breathy shape of sound, like someone exhaling through a smile. I froze. The upstairs hallway was a black mouth above me. I couldn't see the top of the stairs, only the lower steps disappearing into shadow. Another whisper, this one closer. And then, the softest sound of all, a bare foot on carpet. The storm cracked again, thunder detonating overhead, and the lightning flash showed me the staircase in harsh detail. There was water on the steps, drops, spaced like someone was descending slowly, and on the fourth step from the bottom, there was a footprint. Fresh, wet. My flashlight beam wobbled up the stairs, illuminating each step, each dark smear, and when it reached the top, nothing. No figure, no face, no eyes, just the darkness. Until something moved in it, a slow shift, like a person leaning out of a doorway to watch. I didn't wait to see more. I yanked the front door open so hard it slammed into the wall. Wind and rain tore at me immediately, icy needles in my face. I sprinted onto the porch in socks, nearly slipping on the slick wood, and I stopped, because the porch light was on. It shouldn't have been. The power was out. But there it was, glowing warm and steady above my head, humming softly like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. I stared at it, rain running down my eyelashes, my knife still clutched in my fist like a stupid, useless thing. Then, I saw the extension cord. It ran from my porch, down the steps, across the lawn, and into the darkness of the yard, threading between trees toward the street where my neighbor's house sat, dark and silent. Except, it wasn't going to my neighbor's house. It disappeared behind the thick trunk of the old oak tree near the curb, and there, half hidden by rain and shadow, was a small generator, running, purring, keeping my porch light on like a beacon. Like someone wanted me to come outside, like someone had planned for me to. I turned back to the open front door. Lightning flashed, and for one sharp instant, I saw into my living room. I saw the candle on the table. I saw the wet footprints. And in the hallway, standing in the darkness where the smoke detector blinked green, I saw a silhouette. Tall, still, head tilted just slightly, like it was listening. Then the lightning faded, and it was gone again, swallowed by dark. I didn't go back in. I ran off the porch into the storm, slipping and catching myself on wet grass, the generator's purr following me like an insect buzz. I ran down the driveway toward the street, toward any light, any neighbor, any car. Behind me, my porch light stayed on. And then, quiet as a secret, the front door closed, not slammed, not blown shut. Closed gently like someone was tidying up. The porch light clicked off right after. And in the sudden darkness, the storm felt less like weather and more like laughter. The storm showed up like it had a grudge. It started as a soft, steady rain, the kind that sounds like someone lightly tapping a finger on the window. Then, the wind picked up and the taps turned into fingernails, quick and impatient, dragging down the glass. By the time the first real thunder hit, the whole house felt like it was bracing. I was home alone. Not my parents ran to the store, home alone. More like the kind where the sun had already set, my phone was on 12%, and the nearest neighbor was far enough away that if I yelled, the storm would swallow it. I tried to be chill about it. Hoodie, blanket, TV on low. I told myself I liked storms. Then the power flickered. Not fully out, just that quick, sickening blink where everything goes dead for a heartbeat and comes back wrong. The TV stuttered, the lamps dimmed, the microwave clock flashed 12 o'clock like it had been reset by an invisible hand. I stood there staring at the living room, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down. That's when something hit the back door. Not like wind, not like a branch, a solid impact. Once. Then again, softer, like a test. I froze. The back door was glass with blinds. I couldn't see through it unless I walked close, and suddenly the idea of walking close felt like volunteering. I grabbed my phone and lifted it like it could protect me. Nothing outside but rain and darkness, right? Another hit, harder. The blinds shivered. I forced myself to move, keeping my steps quiet, my eyes glued to that door. I reached the edge of the kitchen and leaned just enough to see. The blinds were closed, but one slat near the bottom was bent, angled slightly upward. Something had pushed it. The storm outside flashed white for a second from lightning, and for that split instant, I saw a silhouette on the patio. Not a person standing upright, more like someone crouched low, right up against the glass. Then the lightning died, and it vanished back into black. I couldn't breathe. My mind tried to reject it. Wind, a shadow, a bush, anything. But there's a difference between something and someone. Your body knows it before your brain admits it. My phone had no service, not one bar, not weak signal, none. It just said SOS in the corner, like it was apologizing. I backed away from the door so slowly my legs shook. The storm groaned, the house creaked, and somewhere upstairs, something shifted, like a footstep on carpet. I snapped my head toward the staircase. The upstairs was dark. The hallway light I usually left on was off because I'd been trying to save power. The stairs looked like a mouth. I stood still and listened. There it was again, soft. A drag, like fabric brushing against a wall. I wasn't supposed to be scared of my own house. I moved toward the living room and grabbed the biggest thing I could find without thinking, a metal fireplace poker. In my hands, it felt stupid, like bringing a stick to a gunfight. Another thud from the back door, this time followed by the faintest sound of nails, not claws, nails. Fingers, scraping the frame like someone searching for the latch. My stomach turned cold. I whispered, "Go away," to no one, like the house itself needed to hear it. The scraping stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe it worked. Then my phone buzzed. A notification. No signal, no Wi-Fi, but a notification anyway. Unknown. Airdrop. Let me in. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. Airdrop only works if someone is close. Like in the driveway close. Like on the patio close. My hands went numb around the poker. The TV popped and the screen went black. Not from power loss, like it was turned off. In the silence, I heard it clearly. A slow, deliberate knock from the front door. 3 taps, not frantic, not angry, polite. Like they knew I was standing right there holding my breath. I didn't move. I couldn't. Another buzz, unknown. Airdrop. I can see you. I spun and looked toward the living room windows. The blinds were half open because I'd been watching the storm earlier. The room behind me was lit dimly by a lamp. and in that reflection, barely like a smear, I saw movement near the glass. Someone standing outside, close enough that their outline warped the wet window. My throat made a sound I didn't recognize, half gasp, half choke. I killed the lamp with a slap, plunging the living room into darkness. The knock at the front door stopped. Everything stopped. Even the storm somehow felt quieter in that moment, like it was holding its breath too. I crept toward the hallway, staying low, trying to think of a plan that wasn't wait here and die. My phone buzzed again, and I almost dropped it. Unknown. Airdrop. Don't turn off the lights. That message did something to me. Not fear. Rage. Like, who was this? Who thought they could stand outside my house and command me? I tightened my grip on the poker and stepped into the hallway. The air felt colder there. The kind of cold that doesn't come from weather, but from absence. Like something had been sitting in the dark for a long time. The upstairs creaked again, one step, then another. Not the random settling of wood, a rhythm. Someone was coming down. Every hair on my arms rose. I raised the poker and backed up until I was pressed against the wall. The stairwell was just a black column. I couldn't see the steps, only the outline. Then a lightning flash lit the whole house for a second, and I saw a shape halfway down the stairs. It wasn't a person I knew. It wasn't even fully human in the way my brain expects. The limbs were too long. The head was tilted in a way that looked curious, like a dog listening. But the worst part, it was smiling. Not a friendly smile. Not even a cruel smile. A smile like it was enjoying how completely still I was. The light died again and it was gone. I didn't wait to confirm it. I ran. Not upstairs, not toward the doors, straight for the bathroom because it was the only room with a lock. I slammed myself inside, turned the lock, and leaned my whole weight against the door. I listened. At first, nothing. Then, soft footsteps in the hall, slow, measured. Like whoever it was wanted me to know they weren't rushing. A hand brushed the outside of the bathroom door. I heard the faint squeak of skin against wood. And then a voice, muffled but close, came through the door. "Don't you recognize me?" It wasn't a normal question. It wasn't said like a stranger trying to calm someone down. It was said like the speaker was offended I didn't already know. My mouth opened, but no words came out. The voice continued, almost playful now. "You looked right at me from the window." My eyes darted to the tiny bathroom window. It faced the side of the house, the one place I couldn't easily see from inside. The storm flashed again and the window lit up. A face filled it, not outside looking in, pressed flat against the glass, like it had been there waiting. The skin was pale and smooth. The eyes were open too wide, unblinking, like it forgot that people blink. Its mouth stretched into that same smile I'd seen on the stairs. And then, as if it was copying me, it raised a hand and mimicked knocking. Tap, tap, tap. On the bathroom window. My whole body locked. I backed away and nearly slipped, grabbing the sink. My phone buzzed again. I looked without meaning to. Unknown airdrop. You can lock one door, not all of them. The doorknob on the bathroom door slowly turned, not yanked, not rattled, just turned gently, as if whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world. I could hear it breathing now, a wet, patient inhale through a smile. Then the knob stopped turning, and something else took its place. The sound of fingernails scratching down the door, starting near the top and sliding to the bottom in one long stroke. Like it was measuring, like it was counting the distance between me and it. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to think. The bathroom had no other exit, no crawl space, no closet, no ceiling hatch, just me and a locked door. Then I heard a new sound. My own front door opening. Not a crash, not a break. The soft click of it being unlocked. The slow creak as it swung inward. My stomach dropped. Someone else was in my house now, and whoever was at the bathroom door stopped scratching. They were listening too. For a second, even the thing at the window tilted its head like it didn't expect company. Footsteps moved through the living room. Heavy boots, purposeful. A voice called out, low and urgent, "Hello, anyone here?" A real voice, human. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. I shouted, "I'm in the bathroom, please!" I stopped, because the voice downstairs finished its sentence. "Don't move." It wasn't a warning to help me. It was an instruction to something else. The thing at the bathroom door let out a sound that wasn't a laugh, but had the same shape, like air being squeezed through teeth. Then it whispered right through the wood. Too late. The bathroom light flickered on by itself. I hadn't touched the switch. The mirror over the sink fogged in a spreading bloom, like someone had exhaled onto it from inches away. Letters began to appear in the condensation, not drawn with a finger. Pressed from the other side, like the mirror was thin skin. "We're both in here." My knees gave out. I hit the tile hard, pain shooting up my spine, and the poker clattered away. Behind me, from inside the bathroom, inside the room with me, a voice that matched mine perfectly whispered, "Don't turn around." And the lock on the bathroom door clicked open.